Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. Really fascinated by today's guest, Jan Rutherford. Some of you may have heard of Jan Rutherford. He's got one of the top podcasts out there. So in comparison to my podcast history, I'm kind of a puppy. So I do appreciate you joining me today. Jan is the author of Becoming a Self-Reliant Leader and really has a fascinating backstory that we're going to discover together about how he evolved into one of the best leadership speakers out there today. Jan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you again for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Glad to be here.
Jan, as we were speaking before we started, we talked about the former you at age 17 joining the Army. Yeah. And I noticed in one of the articles, you probably weren't the most physically imposing guy when you went to the Army. And then you opted to pursue something, at least from the outside, how Hollywood makes it. One of the requirements is you're built like Hulk Hogan to go and pursue special forces. Can you take me through, just prior to joining, why you joined, and take me through that career that ultimately led to the Green Berets?
Well, I appreciate the question. I've gotten this question quite a bit over the years. I was a straight A student up until high school, and then we moved. My parents had some financial problems. We moved, and and my grades went down. I was working all the time. I was actually working full time in a meat department as a cleanup boy at night and on the weekends. Dirty, nasty job that they would never let a teenager do now with the bandsaws and the knives and everything else. And, I was really small. I mean, I weighed, at the beginning of my senior year of high school, I weighed 101, 5'4". And so I wasn't playing sports, but I was a drummer. And I thought, well, maybe I'll pursue a career in music, but I didn't have the grades to even get in college. And, I thought, well, maybe I'll go check out the Army band, because I don't want to stay living at home. I want to get out of the house, and I want to go, and maybe I can save some money in the Army and go to college. And by the way, the Army did not have the GI Bill back then. So I went to the recruiter, they sent me to an audition, and on the way back on the plane, I realized, I'm good, but I don't have a great ear. I can't just listen to music and play it. I'm never going to be a professional musician. So I get off the plane, the recruiter's there, and I go, I'm not going to do it. And he was all disappointed because he had a quota.
Sure.
And I said, well, but I really liked flying that airplane. It was my first airplane ride. And I said, so I'd really like to jump out of plane to be a paratrooper. And I kind of have an interest in medicine. Whatever the best, the hardest medic program is, that would be great. And he said, well, you need to go special forces. And I said, I don't want to be a policeman. And he said, no, special forces is the Green Berets. And he showed me this brochure, and everybody looked like Hulk Hogan, as you said. And I looked at him, I said, I can't do this. And he said, yes, you can. And I believed him. I don't know why. And he said, and here's the punchline. He said, there's only one problem. You got to gain at least 2 pounds and be 103 and get a waiver from a doctor. Otherwise, when you jump out of planes, you'll hit the side.
Wait, you were 101 pounds at that point in time?
Yeah, I was a senior. And this is, October of my senior year. I weighed 101 pounds.
Okay.
So I started drinking Joe Weider weight gain, and in January I got up to 109. I gained 8 pounds, and they let me join. And then I went in the Army 2 weeks after graduation. on July 3rd, and I weighed 114. So I went through special forces training. I'm still 5'4". I've gained 20 pounds, but I went through special forces weighing 114. But to get to the point of your question, why did I do that? What were the decisions? In the big scheme of things, I don't think I didn't feel like I had very many options. It wasn't like I thought, boy, there's 20 different things I can do with my life. I thought I had three things and one wasn't available. I thought, I can go to work. I didn't want to do that. I don't have the grades to get in college, and I'm not going to community college and living at home, or I can go in the military. And it was really that simple of that was the math. Three options, what's the best one?
Did you go right into special forces training or have to go through
Yeah,
basic, or
back
how does that
then,
work?
well, now the requirements are very different. I think you've got to be over 21, but this is post-Vietnam, and nobody, and this is, when I went to the recruiters in 1978 and then joined in 79, nobody was volunteering for the
Yeah.
Army because it was post-Vietnam, the draft just ended, and the only people that were really going in the Army were people that the judge said go in the Army or go to jail. So my platoon had a lot of bad dudes. But I was able to, join and say, hey, as long as I pass all the schools, I'll end up in Special Forces qualification course. So, I did all the steps, and all of a sudden I'm in the Special Forces qualification course. And, the rucksack sometimes weighed more than me, the backpack. And we were doing 9 to 12 minute miles walking. Not you weren't allowed to run. And and again, I didn't play any sports in high school. I played them before high school, but I was so little in high school. I mean, when I was a freshman, I weighed 65 pounds. You're not playing high school football weighing 65 pounds. So, in 6 months, or the leading up to the going in the Army from January to July, I just ran and did push-ups and sit-ups. And I became a pretty good runner. But I'd never carried a backpack. I'd never even been in winter. I was coming from South Florida. So I had no experience being cold. And, it was hard. It was really hard. I wanted to quit all the time. I didn't quit, thank God. Because I kept telling myself, if you quit, you'll regret this your whole life. And there's plenty of people that said I would quit. And there's a few people that said I would make it. But in the hindsight, after all these years, now it's 45 years since I got my beret this November. That's a long time ago. I mean, like different human being is, what I figured out is, when you do hard stuff that requires discipline and sacrifice, then it teaches you that you can really do anything. And I'm so glad that I fell into learning that lesson as a
Did you know that at the time as you were pushing through?
No, but I had this weird thing that went in my head that's really weird because I was a single guy and I liked girls and I had no plans to ever get married. But I remember on the days that, I wanted to quit and I was freezing and I was suffering and I was almost crying. The pain was so bad. I remember thinking, if you quit, you know, you're gonna have to tell your grandkids you quit, and you're going to hear about Green Berets your whole life. It's going to be in the news. And are you going to want to be one of these guys that goes, yeah, I quit. And I mean, I was 17, 18 when, all this was going on. And I got my beret right as I turned 19,
Wow. Did you have to make a certain rank prior to that?
No, but right after I made it, I was still a private. I went in the Army as a private. When I got my beret, I was a private first class. As soon as I got my beret, they made me an instructor, and they they don't even do this anymore. They made me an acting sergeant. So I put
Okay.
on sergeant stripes, but I was still a private first class. And then I made E4 and then E5, and then I made it legitimately. But I was kind of lucky in that I got to put sergeant stripes on as a 19-year-old and had a Green Beret, and I looked like I was 12. But, I walked around like I was 20 foot tall and thought I was a badass. Um, and but I mean, again, the great thing about doing that was it set me up, for the rest of my life.
Sure.
And I'm really really glad that, I did that. If you ask me even today, hey, if you could go back in time, would you have chosen that route? I'm like, well, no. I mean, if I went back in time, I would have stayed making straight A's in high school like I did before then. And I would have tried to go to a military academy or Notre Dame or something like that. I mean,
So
my
my
road to where I'm at today was way longer than if I'd gone to a good school. I mean, I wouldn't be who I am today, but to get, all the, the different places I got to in my life and career, it was longer than it would have been if I think, some people start on home plate, some people start on second base, some on third. I wasn't even near the baseball field.
okay.
And I think if you if you went to West Point or Notre Dame, I think you're starting on first base or second. I mean it's a different thing. And I
So
could
Jan,
say this.
my understanding, I just want to make sure I understand this. My understanding is that within the Army, and please correct me if I'm wrong, on the side of Special Forces, you have Green Beret, and then you have the JSOC folks, which go Ranger, and then maybe
No,
CAG. Are
no.
those two different pathways?
Yeah. So there's special operations. That's the
Okay,
umbrella. Each Army, Marines, Air Force, Navy, they all have their own special operations. The Army has Green Berets and Rangers.
got it.
Navy has SEALs. The Air Force has pararescue and PJs. Navy or Marines has MARSOC. There are
Okay,
tier one operators that are higher up. SEAL Team 6 in the Army has the equivalent. Um,
okay.
but in the Army, it draws their tier one operators draw from mainly Green Berets and Rangers.
I see. Okay.
But let
So
me just set
got
for
it.
the audience and for your sake, and again, big bias here, but the difference in Special Forces Green Berets than all the rest is that we had a UW mission, unconventional warfare. Our job was to free the oppressed, de oppresso liber, to be a force multiplier and not only do direct action missions like you think of with commandos, but also a diplomatic mission
Right.
to win hearts and minds and to build fighting forces of oppressed people. And so on an A team in special forces, you'd have a engineer and you'd have a communication expert technology and you'd have a medic and a weapons and they spoke languages and they could take 12 guys and create 1,200 people, a fighting force. So that's no one else under the special operations umbrella has that mission.
Understood. Did you do languages as well in language training?
Well, back then they did not put you in language school unless you were oriented head to deployment. I went straight to the schoolhouse to be an instructor,
Interesting.
so I didn't do that. Now you don't even become a Green Beret without 6 months of language training.
Did you enjoy teaching?
Oh yeah, that's what here's what's crazy. So 19 years old, I'm on the platform, literally a plywood wooden platform, and I'm teaching and loved it. And what I found throughout my whole career, it was all leadership development. It was all teaching, training, developing people. And that's where I'm at today. I'm a leadership development guy, lots of executive coaching, workshops, speeches, but even the podcast, the tagline is "We study leaders." I'm still to this day trying to figure out what makes a leader. And so, that has absolutely been the consistency since I was 19 years old, is I've had this love of trying to figure out how do we get people to the next level,
So
whatever it
you,
is.
so in essence, you backed into your future.
Yeah.
You had choices that at the time did not appear very good. You had no idea where you were going to end up. And it seems like you chose the least worst option
Yeah.
and then
Well,
started to learn more about yourself.
but I chose something. I mean, the recruiter said special forces. I knew it would be hard, but I'm like, I have to do something hard. And I did think, well, geez, if I get this medical training and then I save up money and I go to college, maybe I could be pre-med. Maybe I could go to med school. So I did think about that. Um, as soon as I got to college, I didn't want to study that hard. I I was 3 years in the military, and when I got to college, I met my wife right away, and I just wanted to get through college as fast as I could and get back out there and marry her. And I literally met her. I got out of the army, and she was one of the first girls I met when I got to college. And we were married. We married at 22 years old.
Wow.
We were babies.
You were just accelerating so much of your life into these compressed pieces. It's really
Yeah,
remarkable.
yeah, because I did 3 years enlisted, then 3 years reserve in college and got my commission, and then I did 3 more years as an officer. And it's funny because college wasn't the that wasn't the finishing school for me. I mean, I just it was quick. I was just there, and it was state school, and then I became an officer, and I realized I don't even know. I mean, I did all the requirements to get a commission, but I don't know how to act like an officer and a gentleman. I don't even know how to tie a tie. I don't know how to act at a cocktail party. I don't know how to interact with people. I don't know how to make small talk. I didn't know how to do any of those things. And I remember distinctly, we got to the officer basic course in Arizona, and we're there, and they gave us a check, and we're like, oh my God, we can actually fill up the car with a full tank of gas for the first time ever. And we're at this little reception, and my wife and I are in the corner talking to each other like country bumpkins. And you're just watching for when the colonel left. As soon as the colonel left, you could leave, but you couldn't leave until the senior guy left. And I just remember going, we are so socially off the charts terrible. And I thought, how are we gonna do this? You know, um, because I literally didn't know even how to act at a party, how to do any of that stuff. And now, we do a lot of stuff, socially and with veterans and all kinds of stuff. And my wife and I every once in a while say, remember that time we're just standing in the corner of the room and like country bumpkins?
Sure. When you got out of college, though, what was your goal? What did you think you were going to do when you graduated?
Well, I mean, this goes back to me being little. I'm 5'4", I was scrawny, I had a baby face, and I had okay grades in college, not great. And back then it was like you get a job with IBM or Procter and Gamble, or something. And all the guys that were getting jobs were tall, good looking, they knew how to, they wore suits well. I mean, all this, and I just went, I'm never going to get hired. I mean, that is not a possibility. So as I was looking at that, I'm like, do I stay in the reserves and try to get a civilian job? Or do I spend a few years in the Army active duty, mature, make a little bit of money, grow, mature, and then I go in the business world? So that's what we chose to do. And we said, hey, this is guaranteed income. We'll travel. I'll learn as a leader and grow. But I had no intent on staying in past three years as an officer. So that was our goal, was just to survive being an officer, save, make a little bit of money, and then get into the business world.
And so then what happened after that? What
After
was next?
at the last year in the Army, I just spent all the time trying to learn about the business world. I read all the books. And this is all analog world still. So you'd
Yeah.
send out resumes in the mail, and then you'd wait back. If you researched the company, you went to the library, that data was 5 years old. And they told us officers, you got two choices when you're getting out. This is back, in the 80s. You know, you can go into sales or you can go into manufacturing management. And I'm like, I don't want to wear a hairnet, is my thought. And then I went, my dad was a car salesman. I don't want to sell. And then I'm like, well, I know medicine. I was a Green Beret medic. I know medicine. I remember seeing the Pfizer reps, come around the hospital sometimes, and they seemed like they had really good jobs. They wore nice suits. So I really focused on pharma, and I thought, I'll break in, I'll pay my dues, I'll work my butt off. And, every time I had an interview and they said, what do you want to do in the future? I said, I want your job. I want to be the strategy guy. I want to be a VP. I want to be an executive. And I knew, I'm going to have to slug it out. I'm going to have to pay my dues. And honestly, most of the time when I was selling, I was good at it because I worked really hard. I worked really hard and I was good and I won awards. But 90% of the time, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I hated the fact that I went from being saluted to now I got to grovel to get 30 seconds of a
Yeah.
cardiologist time.
Yeah.
But now, the reason I have been a successful entrepreneur is because I have this great foundation of selling for 4 years. 4 years I sold.
Did you have any formal training? Did you go through any
Oh
formal
God,
sales
yeah. We
courses?
had the best training. We had the best sales training. We had the best leadership development, even better than the Army. The leadership development training in this pharma company I was at, which was based in Kansas City, was the best. Um, the best. And I thought I'd sell for 2 years, and then get promoted. I came in a time when promotions were a little bit slow. They'd had already had a wave. So I spent 4 years. I got promoted. I went from selling to doctors to work in the hospital to being a trainer, and then I went into the home office. But I sold for about 4 years before I started really moving up the ranks, and that was a long 4 years. And I hung in there. And again, if I hadn't done that, if I didn't have that grounding in sales, no way I would be a successful entrepreneur, because there's a ton of people that can do what I do, but most of them can't sell. So they got to work for somebody that can sell. And so that was one of the best things ever. And I found lots of great mentors and I had lots of great bosses. And that's when I felt like, things were really moving in the right direction. And it was about, probably about 2 or 3 years after I got out of the Army that I felt like we're like financially, like we're starting to get comfortable. Like, you know, it,
When did you recognize, starting from zero, and it's very similar to how financial services careers get started. Nobody
yeah.
likes the first few years. The failure rate's about 90%.
Oh yeah, I've heard
When,
that.
yeah, when did you realize that even though you didn't like it, that the skills you were acquiring were really accretive to maybe something out there in the future? So you continued to persevere
Yeah.
and, talk about graduating from the school of hard
Yeah.
knocks. I
Yeah.
mean, you'd be the definition of that.
Well, everybody at the company, I mean, this great company out of the Midwest, everybody that was anybody, an executive, carried the bag. They all sold. And I'm like, well, that's the only path. I mean, it's not like they got anointed because they went to the right school. And this company actually recruited. It was kind of interesting, their recruiting profile. It wasn't Ivy League. They recruited from state schools. They recruited a lot of people that were fraternity and sorority people, very social. Um, and what they were looking for was hunger. That's why I got hired there. I mean, most of the people that got hired were really good looking. They all look like Barbie and Ken. That wasn't me. Um, but they knew I was hungry. And the owner of the company, this would never fly today, but as soon as you got there, he wanted you, one, they didn't really want to hire you unless had a spouse or were engaged. And as soon as you got hired, they wanted you to get a mortgage. They wanted you to go buy a house, you know, like they wanted you to be hungry.
Yeah,
And
I understand.
yeah, and back then they would actually interview your spouse, but they wouldn't call it, and they were interviewing the spouse. They'd say, "Hey, we're gonna have one more meeting. Why don't you bring your spouse? And if she's got any questions, that would be great."
Yeah.
And they were really interviewing, like, back in the day, and this is gonna sound really dated, but they wanted to make sure, your spouse didn't have a bunch of tattoos.
I
Like,
understand.
yeah. I mean, so it was really old fashioned, but that's how it was. And so everybody that got hired there were real similar. And I got hired in a cohort where half of us, about 17 of us, were all prior military
Yeah.
officers, and about half were 22-year-old young women. That was our sales class. And everybody was the same. Everybody wanted to make as much money as possible and get promoted as fast as possible. So motivating us was really simple compared to how it is working with teams now and understanding all the ways people are motivated. It was real simple. And you did what it took. You moved, you accepted the promotions, you did whatever it took to make more money and get promoted, and getting promoted meant more money, and more money meant more options. It meant, more freedom, more, better for your kids, all that. It was a real
And
simple.
the owner of the company carried a bag at one point.
Yeah, and he was a salesman, and there's two values at the company. One was the golden rule: treat others as you'd like to be treated. The other one was those who produce shall share in the results, and that was true. I mean, before I got there, again, we called them secretaries back then. Secretaries and janitors were retiring with $1 million, which is a lot of money. Um, right about a year and a half after I got there, the company got sold, and everybody cashed out. And I remember I was at a district meeting, and they had a guy like you come in, a financial guy come in and talk to everybody about their windfall. And everybody, was, making hundreds of thousands or $1 million or whatever. And he's helping them plan and walking around. He gets to me and he goes, so how much are you getting? $2,000. That's what I got when the company sold. And he
Wow.
quickly, he goes,
Yeah, moved on.
Are your credit cards paid off? And I said, yeah. And he goes, save it. And then he moved on to the next guy, like
Yeah.
end of discussion.
Yeah. Wow. So after that, what happened?
I stayed at the company 10 years, total. And then I found myself going to, mainly in the healthcare industry, kept going to smaller and smaller companies. And the last job that I had was as a CEO of a small company or focused on healthcare. But at the time I was teaching at CU, a leadership course, taking students abroad part-time. I had written the book, my first book. I was doing speaking, and I said to my wife, that the day job's getting in the way.
Yeah. Well,
And
you got to be in your 30s at this point, right?
no, I'm talking, I was late 40s.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fast forwarding quite a bit, but and then we decided to take, finally to leave a paycheck and to start my own company. And I always said, for years I've said, I wish I'd done it 10 years earlier. And my wife always says, we had to go through what we had to go through. You had to learn what you had to learn. And even today, I was talking to some younger guys that are doing what I'm doing. And I'm like, the great thing at this point in my life, at this age, is having the gravitas, that I can, the executives I work with and the CEOs, I can say, hey man, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I could do that if I was 40 years old.
No, it's difficult. That's kind of the McKinsey consulting model, if you will. They hire a bunch of smart people. They ask if they can borrow your watch. You ask them what time it is, and they send you a bill. So I get all that, and it's funny because in my world, there's a lot of similarities. I worked for Merrill Lynch at a very early age before Merrill actually became the best retail brokerage house on the street. I mean, Merrill had it all going on because it was run by guys that used to be client facing.
Yeah.
When they changed that in 2002, because there was some cheating going on in competition for the top job, it was awarded to a guy that used to run the debt for General Motors Acceptance Corporation, a guy named Stan O'Neill.
Hmm.
He got hold of the company and beat out three people by cheating and destroyed the company by 2008.
Wow.
Had Stan O'Neill not gotten that job, I'd probably still be at Merrill Lynch. Merrill Lynch was an amazing firm because it was
Wow.
run by people that were hungry. It was run by, we had a lot of ex-military, and
Yeah.
we had people that they wanted people that golden rule, and you got to want it badly
Yeah.
and earn it every day. And it was a wonderful place to work for 22 years. And I was very friendly with with the founder's son, who should have gotten the top job, a fellow named Win Smith. And Win was the complete opposite of what you'd expect. I mean, he's a New England blue blood with, an incredible pedigree. But as I got to know him better, he exemplified everything that firm was. And
Yeah.
he left Merrill Lynch and bought a mountain in Vermont. He was also a great skier.
Oh, wow.
And when I went to him, he said, "You ought to get out of here." I said, I don't know if I can ever leave Merrill Lynch. He goes, "Gary, Merrill Lynch left you."
Hmm.
And he published a great book called Lightning in a Bottle, which is really an interesting read,
Oh, yeah.
where he discloses most everything that happened. But you're so correct. I mean, you
Yeah.
knew and gained all of that experience the whole way up. How did you develop at that point? How did you develop the speaking career?
Um, you know, I remember when I was a trainer, at the pharma company in we're early 30s, we're five of us sitting around and we go, hey, let's predict where all of us will be in 5 years. And I remember when it came to me, everybody goes, oh, you're going to be living in the mountains teaching college. And, I was in Kansas City at the time, and 5 years later, not 5 years later, probably 10 years later, I was here in Colorado, and I wasn't teaching college. I didn't, I had a master's, I didn't have a PhD, but I remember meeting the dean of the business school at a networking thing, and by then I learned how to network and talk to people at things. And we got talking. She said, hey, you should call this professor. He'd love to have you as a guest lecturer. I went and guest lectured. He's told the dean, hey, he's really good. We should, bring him on as an adjunct. I met another guy and he goes, hey, create this course for us. I did. And we tried to get it running. The first year, nobody signed up, so it didn't go. Next year, he's like, hey, let's talk to the nursing school. We're trying to get MBA students. We're still going to try to get them, but let's try to get the doctor of nursing practice, nurse practitioners that are working on their doctorate that need leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And the nursing school made my course mandatory.
Interesting.
And then the MBA came along. So I had this really great cohort every time I taught the course, where I had MBA students who just wanted to take a course. They didn't really want to learn anything. They just wanted to get the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the nurses, and they were 99% women, all wanted to learn about leadership. And you had people here that just wanted to make money, and you had here people that wanted to improve the quality of life and prolong life of people. So it was really cool. And so I got to use all my medical and healthcare training and my business and teach this course. And then that kept going. Then I started taking students to Ireland where I have dual citizenship. And I networked like crazy all over Ireland and created this great course, and we take people over for 2 weeks every year. And that went almost 20 years I did this. And while I was doing it, I wrote my book, based on the curriculum I put together. Once I had the book, then I started speaking, and people, wanted to hear what I had to say. And then, you know, as my wife would say, the market will tell you what it values. And then a lot of people said that, what, they wanted me to be an executive coach for them. And that actually turned out to be way better than speaking, because speaking, you're always looking for your next gig.
Yeah,
Executive
it's gig work.
coaching
Pays
is,
well, but it's gig work.
yeah, and you're traveling. And executive coaching, and what happens with that is it's recurring revenue. And once I coach one person, they're going to ask me to coach two, three others. And then I coach them. Then they want me to work with the team and do workshops. And then let's create a leadership development program for the emerging leaders. So that's really how the business, evolved. And I lead expeditions a couple times a year with executives and veterans that are transitioning out. And I try to help them based on my own experience transitioning out of the military. And so, we do that. And that's what we wrote. That second book was about what we've learned on all those crucible expeditions over the years and how it relates exactly to business.
So if you look at this, I think you and I followed pretty similar paths. I knew, when I was traveling all the time, the only good part of traveling was being up in front of that room for 6 hours and watching the lights go on in people's eyes.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't there threatening them. I wasn't telling them to do anything wrong, but I was trying to kind of get across that the best financial advisors exercise the best leadership skills, but we have to lead an extremely diverse group of people that are completely different from one another.
Yeah.
Every one of your clients that you are managing their money for, they wish they were the only client you had. But if you're managing 100 families, you've got 100 things you've got to do.
Yep.
So you've got to be mentally flexible, highly empathetic, and really pay attention. And the business, the way it developed was most FAs just went for volume. They went for, let me get as many accounts as I can. Let me sell them as much junk as I can sell them and make as much money as possible. Instead, and I talk to FAs all the time, and when I find out that there are some FAs that take a suggestion position instead of a leadership position, with their clients, consistently they're unhappy.
Yeah.
They don't feel valued. They have some clients that may look at them as leaders. They follow their guides. They have other clients who just don't follow their advice, but are more than willing to blame them when things go wrong. And there's a certain alignment that has to take place.
Yeah.
Um, the traveling is rough. I understand. I like what I do now because I do most of my stuff on Zoom. And then as I
Yeah.
say that, I realize I'm going to Michigan in 2 weeks for 3 days to talk to a
Yeah.
bunch of Morgan Stanley people because I do miss the interaction. I get energy from the audience. At what point, let's go back to when you were actually doing live training. At what point did you start to see people's lights go on? And I'm going to assume it was probably pretty consistent across different groups.
Well, early days, I would get, better reviews than the other instructors. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'm pretty good at this. Um, so I mean that's kind of where, I would sit in on other instructors. I just saw a different level of engagement. And I never felt like I had the silver tongue and the polish. I felt like my approach was authentic. There was passion. Um, hopefully some humility that came across in that. But I that's what makes me tick. I mean, that's why I like helping veterans transition. I mean, it's like I have what I love, what I've always loved is taking all this stuff that I know or I figured out that might be complicated. And again, what I love to do is make it simple. I'm
I couldn't agree
always,
more. I think that is
yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
100% the mark of a great speaker. You've got to keep the brightest, most impatient person in the room engaged, but you can't lose the guy that,
yeah,
failed sixth grade math. You've got to keep him in there as well. And a lot of it is kind of self-effacing. And I think the central message, it sounds like you communicated effectively. If I'm sitting in the audience, I'm thinking to myself, this guy's been where I am right now. A lot of people are afraid to admit what they don't know.
yeah,
They might think they're the smartest
yeah,
people. If you always, my thinking is if you think you're the smartest person in the room, get to a different room
yeah,
because there's
yeah.
nothing there for you. So I can understand why you were effective.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing is, I'll just say this, biggest thing that I think missing with organizations being successful is if I had to pick one thing, it would be discipline. It's like everybody's got great ideas, everybody's got great values, everybody's got great goals, but the difference is the discipline to execute the sacrifices that'll be made. And what I think is, as a leadership guy, I think, people that know me know there's a certain amount of discipline that goes into the way I live my life. And I, and again, this is going to sound weird and not very humble, but I think what people are really looking for in leaders or coaches or financial advisors is they're looking for somebody that's squared away. Like,
Yeah.
you've got, you got your stuff together. If you're married, you've got a good marriage. If you got kids, the kids are squared away. Your money's fine. You're happy. You're fulfilled. You, you, you have balance in your life. You help charities, you take great vacation. I mean, that they look at somebody and they're like, you know, they ha- they know what a good life is, and they're doing their best to live it now. It's not something that is in the future, and it at the center of that is a life lived in the service of others.
I couldn't agree more. I think that, I was raised that way, that if you have an opportunity to do something and you have a capability to do it, even though it may not benefit you, it's a long life and karma is very real. Do
Yeah,
it. It's going to work itself out.
yeah.
Jan, this is fascinating. I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much for taking the time.
I hope it was helpful for the audience, and that there's, and hopefully people can see themselves in our
I
stories.
think they can, and I know that, especially from the military perspective, I have deep respect. It's one of the things, if I could go back in time, I would do. My timing was not great. I wanted to fly airplanes off boats, and it was post-Vietnam, and they had more pilots than they knew what to do with. So I learned it myself, but I still miss it. How do people find you? How do people engage with you? What
Well,
type of clients are you looking for?
yeah, most of my clients are C-level folks that are grappling with, with things, and usually it's they want to be more strategic with their time, and they've got some people stuff, whether it's managing up or sideways, or dealing with some folks that they're not sure if they need to keep them. Best way to find me is on LinkedIn, and my website's selfreliantleadership.com. And the easiest way really to find me is just type in Jan Rutherford on Google, and I'll pop up.
Well, I'm going to follow your podcast, and we'll certainly promote, not that you need it, but we'll certainly promote once we get this thing up and posted. I can't thank you enough for joining. It's really fascinating.
Oh,
I think your message is universal, not just for entrepreneurs, but also for people that are leading organizations, because the best organizations are led by entrepreneurs. So
yeah.
I'm glad you found your way and you found your niche. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. Thanks for the
Great.
great questions.
It's been my pleasure. We've been listening and visiting with Jan Rutherford, leadership expert, ex-Army Green Beret, and jack of many trades. And if you need to find him, we'll put the links down below in the podcast, but definitely someone worth knowing. This has been Gary Cinderbrand for If the Public Only Knew, and we will see you on the next podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.